I know I've been rather quiet on the subject of Makoto Kino, but seeing as how this is her introduction into the series proper, let's just get all my thoughts out of the way. Well, she acts like summer and walks like rain and reminds me that there's a time to change. Since the return of her stay on the moon, she listens like spring and she talks like June. Tell me, wait, what was I even talking about? While it's true that Act 5 is the official drop of Jupiter into the story proper, there's still quite a bit of setup that we actually need to discuss before we can even get there. This particular act begins unlike any other we've seen so far, with a dream sequence. Memories and dreams are an important motif within the confines of this arc and within the wider zeitgeist of the series. And while there isn't much to go off in this particular scene, it starts this trend. On that particular note, I believe this scene would have been better suited one chapter earlier, as it serves as not only better setup for the events of that chapter, but it's repeated thematically therein. Within this context, it's, well, serviceable, but if the intros of last chapter and this one were flopped, I feel like they would have served as better intros for the story being told at present. But this story is a continuous one, and having connected threads is good for cohesion. Foreshadowing be damned. Speaking of cohesion, the Usagi recap actually has narrative bearing. It's nothing major, but if you're going to take a few pages of your narrative to recap a previous chapter, at least this is a somewhat natural way to do so. Usagi talks about her strange dreams, and Luna tells Usagi to take a more active role in her own life, relaying her fears about Tuxedo Common. This, in turn, distracts Usagi, who, in a dreamlike state, walks into oncoming traffic, which naturally introduces a character we will all become very familiar with, who saves her life. Of course, it's Tuxedo Common. Wait, oh. What is it with roses? With how the narrative's been treating us, maybe this is Tuxedo Common. This introduction is really nothing too groundbreaking, but it makes good use of established character traits of Usagi and manages to say a lot about this girl without needing to spell anything out for us. Compared to the last Senshi introduction, this one is extremely competent in establishing everything we need to know in a few simple panels. I love this panel of Usagi getting saved. It's some of the most dynamic shots of her within her untransformed state. We also get a fantastic sense of scale within this introduction, as this girl is an absolute unit, towering over the admittedly short Usagi. It somewhat helps explain the previous scene without needing to explicitly say, yeah, this girl lifts. Also, for the sake of simplicity, I'm simply going to be referring to her by her name, Makoto Kino, as we have several important character-defining scenes that come up and a good 7 pages until the name's dropped. This is for your sanity just as much as it is for mine. Usagi also makes mention of her savior's rose earrings, which happen to be a magical artifact given how much they transform within any given panel. Sometimes they are literal roses, sometimes they're simple hoops, sometimes they're whatever the hell this is. Interestingly enough, they are the only earrings that don't get transformed with the usage of the Henshin pen. Even Venus's change color. Back at Juban Middle School, we get a rather interesting setup. Usagi's friends, Naru and... hold on, let me look her up. Yumiko are looking at a photo of Naru's cousin. Her actual cousin, not her lesbian lover, who is getting married and conveniently looks exactly like Naru. The girls all gush about the prospect of a wedding when Naru brings up the notion that the groom has gone missing, and not a single mention of any rumors of some haunted bridal shop, so it seems to be a natural occurrence. Don't worry, those rumors will still come, much to my disappointment. We're just spared of them at this particular moment. Who really shines in the following scenes is our newest character of Makoto Kino, mostly due to the fact that she gets some actual characterization. When you boil it down, she's still essentially the quote-unquote strong one, but there's enough direct and indirect characterization to make her character memorable. In my Sailor Moon Iceberg video, I had asked the simple question of who everybody's favorite Senshi was, and Jupiter was a surprisingly common response. It's almost to a baffling degree, seeing as how, within the wider reaches of the series, how underutilized she is, even having her entire character gimmick stolen and done to better effect, making her effectively a redundant character. I like to think the efforts Naoko put forth into Makoto's characterization at the very beginning had gone a long way into making the character as popular as she is despite everything I just said. So let's get into that, shall we? An interesting aspect of Makoto's design is the deliberate nature of said design. Everything about her is meant to be indicative of a certain cultural subsect of Japan at the time, which is easy to recognize for a Japanese girl in 1992, but it's a harder concept to translate well 30 years later in 2022. Without delving too deeply into the subject, Makoto is meant to resemble a typical Sukeban, a countercultural group that has existed in one form or another within Japan since at least the 1960s. That, as the name suggests, are delinquents. This in turn became a popular character archetype for several seinen and shoujo manga, which in turn leads itself back to Makoto, as her outfit was the style of Sukeban for a time. Although by the time she hit the pages, that look was being phased out. But there's definitely a lot of inspiration. All this talk of Sukeban reminds me of something. What was it? Not remembering is gonna kill me. Another point of contention is Makoto's hair, which in a monotone manga is hard to represent, but is stated to look like a dyed color, which, considering it's not jet black, it might as well be dyed to a stereotypical Japanese teacher. In most official art colorings done by Naoko, it's kind of a toss-up exactly what color Makoto's hair is. It's definitely not brown, maybe a light auburn, but then again, what is this teacher complaining about? Have they seen the hair color of their top student? Is Ame's hair black with a bluish shade, or is it just straight up blue? Well, that's less realistic than Makoto's. Why doesn't Usagi get harassed like this? Actually, come to think of it, Naru's hair is a rather similar shade. It must be this man's first and last day at Juban Middle School, because the hair colors alone are gonna drive him to quit. Umino does his gossiping thing and feeds into the rumor mill that Makoto was removed from her last school due to being a delinquent and picking a fight, just to really send that whole Sukeban thing home. What does Umino do with his life? Does he have some sort of database for useless rumors? Why is he spreading rumors when a guy like him was probably subject to a few himself? Why do I care? To Usagi's credit, she is once again easily able to dispel these rumors and see the true nature of the person right in front of her in a relatively short amount of time. Like, almost instantly, and I've always enjoyed this aspect of her character. Sure, you can headcanon that she already knows these people, but that kind of takes away from a really unique aspect of her character that just makes her damn likable. I've always felt that this one single panel of Makoto sitting by herself puts in the most work in characterizing her, especially in hindsight knowing the character. The feelings of isolation that are indicative of the character portrayed just beautifully here. When you think about it, Makoto is quite the tragic character, yet she never really dwells on it. Maybe that's what fans find so endearing about her. Or they just want her to bench press them. I haven't quite figured that one out yet. After some introduction shenanigans, Usagi decides to take Makoto to Game Center Crown, where Ame meets up with the both of them. It's here that we finally learn Makoto's name, but more importantly, we are formally introduced to Motoki Furuhata, whom I neglected to refer to as Game Center Guy previously. And to rectify this grievous mistake, I will only call him such for the rest of this episode. Usagi then remarks that Makoto is now part of the group, which seems kind of odd. I mean, she's not wrong, but she doesn't know Makoto is a Sailor Senshi. If she wasn't, would she just revoke her group status? Or is there a separate group where Naru and Game Center Guy are in? Is there another group where Umino and Yumiko are? Regardless of group status, Ame decides we've had enough character-driven storytelling and we really need to get back to that Monster of the Week formula by bringing up, yep, you guessed it, a rumor about paranormal activity. This time a haunted bridal shop. According to the rumor, there's a mannequin dressed as a bride that abducts people. To make matters even worse, if one were to purchase a dress from this location, she'll get you as well. Sure, I guess. Just a few simple questions. How long has this been going on for this rumor to be well established? The whole haunted bride seducing men thing is more or less a cultural urban legend, but the part about purchasing the dress? Also, why is Nephrite using a bridal store as a base of operation? Why is his shadow dressed as a woman again? Everyone talks about Kunzite and Zoisite changes, but Nephrite doesn't wear drag once in the anime. Hashtag justice for Nephrite.
So you girls just keep on fighting for all your lofty truth and justice, because very soon the Negaforce will be taking over. See ya.
The gang decides to change the scenery while still fixated on the subject of ghost brides, and head to the Hikawa Shrine, which is actually logical considering the subject matter. What isn't logical is what follows next. Makoto decides to bail once she gets to the shrine instead of on the bus ride there. We know it's a bus ride distance from Act 3, so it doesn't matter. I know I dunked pretty hard on Jadeite's entire plan a few episodes ago, but Nephrite makes that guy look like Lelouch in comparison. A demon bus at least has the ability to move around and swipe up huge groups of people, especially in a dense metropolitan area. He could easily nab 20, 30 people even with his arbitrary time restrictions. It's still a dumb plan, but he wanted to get caught. Nephrite's is just plain dumb. It has the same end result, but he ended up catching 5 people, 2 of which ultimately resulted in his death. He's a fan favorite villain, by the way. So the haunted bride, which we can assume is Nephrite's other self, or Soul Shadow 2 Electric Boogaloo, decides to go after Game Center Motoki. We then see Makoto buying beer from a vending machine. I'm not making that up. Fake gamer Andrews shows up and tells her that he loves her, all in an effort to steal her energy. Sadly for them, having learned a lesson from Luna, Mamoru decides to cockblock in the least effective way possible, by taking the time to dress up as Tuxedo Common, heading to Usagi's house, and then bringing her to intervene. How do you know where she lived? The handkerchief gave away her identity, but I don't remember having a return address. Did he look her up in the phone book? The whole energy stealing process is either incredibly slow or Usagi happens to live right down the street. Because when our heroes show up, literally nothing has changed. Usagi then decides to make use of the Henso pen for probably the first practical reason: to confuse and stall for time. Sadly, it's also the least interesting transformation in my opinion. There comes a point when you realize almost all of Naoko's men are some derivative offshoot from an original ancestor that I will be referring to as Motoki Prime. There's Mamoru, Jadeite, Ito, Saphir, Hakaru, Dr. Tomoe, Danabert. Hell, I'll throw in Haruka for good measure. Essentially, she only has one of 4 attractive male designs that get shuffled through, and a gender-bent Usagi happens to be part of the Motoki Prime genus. It's not half as interesting as it could have been or should have been. And I think I've illustrated my point more profoundly than Naoko bothered to illustrate a male Usagi. So moving on. Having sufficiently bought enough time for the rest of the Senshi to arrive, Usagi chastises Ioma for its actions. This causes Makoto to realize the whole thing was just an elaborate energy stealing scheme, and she just yeets the Ioma. While a unique character moment for her, the ensuing Senshi transformation is perhaps the most lackluster one on display. It just kinda happens without much cause. I mean, the thing was already dead. Nephrite then decides to reveal his location to a really pissed off Sailor Jupiter, which has to be on the top 20 dumbest decisions ever made in this series, considering that Jupiter gets not 1, but 2 signature moves from the get-go. Geez, Jupiter, why'd Mom give you 2 magical attacks? Flower Hurricane, which is a flower-based aqua mist, pretty much. It doesn't seem to have offensive capabilities, but blinds opponents, which is just to distract Nephrite, followed by Sailor Jupiter's most iconic move, It doesn't have a name. Later releases call this move Jupiter Thunderbolt, since it's clearly not Supreme Thunder. It looks identical to Supreme Thunder in every conceivable way, but it's a different move entirely for some reason. With the attack resolved and Nephrite having successfully stolen Jadeite's look,
Stole your dude! I'll kill him!
our heroes have secured another victory. Not to jump cut too much, but there is a short reaction page where we see how the Dark Kingdom is currently handling the loss of their own. It's really nothing important, but unlike Ray's grandpa, if I skip it, somebody might notice. Tuxedo Kamen, having successfully single-handedly saved the day, runs off into the horizon, as the kidnapped victims start to come to. Makoto starts to get all misty-eyed, elaborating on why she fell for such an obvious trick as a fake Motoki. There was once a guy who looked like Motoki, which, as I've established, is far more common than you'd think, who broke her heart at her old school, and that's the real reason she transferred. She ends this little section on a more triumphant note, stating that something else must have brought her here. I don't really care for this backstory. Not the vulnerability, that's essential to Makoto as a character, but the fact that she just got up and ran from the situation, it doesn't mesh with what we know about her as a character, even up to this point. She's then officially introduced to the group as Sailor Jupiter. And while that's a rather fitting note to leave on, this chapter isn't quite done yet, as Luna has one more surprise in store for us in the form of the Moon Stick. Goodbye, Moon Frisbee. You will be missed. Next time we will be removing the mask from the tuxedo, as we will be covering both Acts 6 and 7. These parts are extremely focused on Tuxedo Kamen, but I believe it's finally time I devote a little bit of time discussing the Shiten Tenno. Sorry for the delay, but I hope you all enjoyed and will join me for our next study session. Till then, yours truly, Senpai.